What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201, an advice channel for fantasy football, where my goal is to give you advice on fantasy football for the season to help you win a championship. I'm previewing every team this summer leading up to the NFL season, and in this video we are doing the Philadelphia Eagles. So if you want to check out any team alphabetically listed before Philadelphia, take a look at my channel, and I've got that a preview of that team. You can also check out my other content as well if you're interested. I also make song covers, react to songs, other things like that. So if you're interested in all that stuff, please consider commenting, or subscribing. So I want to talk about something real quick, and I honestly really shouldn't be having conversations like this, but I just want to make this clear, just so this stuff doesn't happen in the future. But I'm somebody I'm not a full-time YouTuber. This is just something I do as a hobby for fun. I do this because one, I enjoy fantasy football, and two, I want to help people in fantasy football with some of the advice that's worked for me, to help them be successful too, because it is a fun sport. And I also, other stuff on my channel, I just hope that, it could be an inspiration to some people to pursue their interests, even if it's not their number one thing that they do in their life. It's not their full-time job. But what really frustrates me is when I get commenters that, for lack of better words, are not genuinely trying to seek help, and I can tell are robots that are trying to get some kind of access to money or an account or something like that. These guys always start out with some comments along the lines of, "Oh, I need a lot of help. I couldn't do anything without you. You're going to save my season." But then these people, as much as they demand, they're almost never grateful for anything, and they always demand more and more and more. And these people are just leeches. They are internet scams, and these people literally should not even be on YouTube, because I've seen people that are naive to this stuff and think that it's real, and it basically ruined their life. I've seen a situation where somebody, it wasn't on YouTube, but it was on some other, I think it was like WhatsApp or something. This guy literally gave somebody his bank account, and they literally took everything except for $2. And his whole life was ruined because of it. So when I see these kind of things on YouTube, it just irritates me, because these people are professional scammers. And, I personally do not want any of that stuff involved. If I see something that involves some guy asking about, "Oh, I need to have a big bro," or something to that effect, I know that's a scam. And I'm not trying to belittle people that are looking for somebody that could be a brother figure in their life, but just to be realistic, I'm going to try to do what I can to help, but I cannot overextend myself to help people in those situations, especially when there's people like that are playing a persona because they're trying to scam somebody. So I just want to put that out there. So if you're happen to be somebody that is running a fake account and you see this, you probably shouldn't be commenting on my channel. In fact, you should probably just get off YouTube entirely and rethink your life. But I'm just putting that out there because I had to deal with this a few days ago, and it's frustrating for me to see people like that on the internet that are blatantly taking advantage of people. But for those of you that genuinely want my advice, I'm here for you. I'm doing this all voluntarily, because I want to share my perspective of things that's worked for me. So if you're interested in that, consider commenting, or subscribing. I'll do my best to try to get in contact with you. I just ask to be patient, because once again, this isn't my full-time job. This is just something I'm doing for fun. So all that being said, we now move into the trivia question for the Eagles. So the trivia question I have for the Eagles today, and this is actually going to play to an interesting point that I'm going to talk about later. Who was the number one receiver last year for the Eagles in terms of receptions? Who had the most receptions on the Eagles last season? And this illustrates a point I'm going to talk about here with just bad management on the Eagles' part. I will probably actually answer this question in the video, so if you want to stay tuned to the end of it and then comment it below, I will answer one of your fantasy football questions below. So just putting that out there. But if you do know it before you get to that point, comment that individual below, and I will shout you out for your support and answer one of your questions for the next video that I'm going to be doing on the Steelers. So So take advantage of it while you can. So we will go to the Eagles preview. And I take a look at their schedule like I do for every team. And basically for the Eagles, my takeaway on their schedule is that they have a very light beginning of the season in terms of matchups. They play a lot of poor defenses, but then later on they play a lot of challenging matchups. So my takeaway is after week 8, you want to consider trying to sell high on some of these Eagles players where you can. So for example, let's take a look at their season. The first half, they do have 2 tough matchups. They play San Francisco at home and Tampa Bay at home. But aside from that, the first 8 weeks of the season, they also play Atlanta, Dallas, Kansas City. That defense to be determined how good they'll be. Carolina, Las Vegas, and Detroit. So some of those defenses are projected to be among the worst in the NFL. So the Eagles could really take advantage of that at the beginning of their season. But then things get a lot more difficult when they go into week 9. They play the Los Angeles Chargers. I think they will be a much better defense with Joey Bosa. They also play New Orleans, the Giants twice. Giants, I don't think they're going to be a great defense necessarily, but I think they will manage to keep most games competitive and close, especially NFC East battles end of the season when it's colder. They play the Washington football team twice in the span of the fantasy football playoffs. They also play Denver in there as well, which is projected to be, depending on how Von Miller turns out and his health, they could be a good defense too. So, and basically, difficult end of the season, lighter beginning. So consider selling high on some of these players, especially if they break out at the beginning. Try to trade them for more consistent options later on in the season. So now we move to the quarterback position. And Philadelphia's quarterback is Jalen Hurts, the rookie that they drafted. Previously played with Alabama, but was on Oklahoma last year, or the last year that he was in college. And I'm a big fan of Jalen Hurts because he is a guy that will provide a lot of rushing value for you, that I think will give you a consistent floor. But he's also going to be attainable at the end of the draft, where you can probably get a good fantasy quarterback for stream value that could have the upside to break out. Jalen Hurts, there's limitations on his game, sure, but there's no question about the athlete that he is, especially running the ball. If Nick Sirianni can create a system in which Jalen Hurts can really utilize his strengths, kind of have room to run, get the ball out in the open, similar to kind of a system like Kyler Murray, ironically, the guy who started for Oklahoma before Hurts got there. I could see him being a very good fantasy football player. He presents a lot of upside, and he's where you can get him in the draft. It doesn't really cost you that much to cut him and get a waiver quarterback. So I'm a fan of Jalen Hurts if you're going to take the strategy of drafting a quarterback later. I think he could be excellent value for you. And, he did have some games at the end of the season that kind of questioned his value, particularly against the Washington football team. He's only 7 for 20 and 72 yards and interception. But he did rush for 2 touchdowns in that game. And particularly against Arizona, he threw for 338 yards, had 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and he also ran for a touchdown that game. So, especially the way that he's starting the season with lighter matchups, could be a very good early season value, and maybe you could flip him to try to get a better quarterback later on. But Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback to look at, especially if you're drafting late. Other quarterbacks of note they have on their team, they signed Joe Flacco as the veteran. If he ever becomes the starter, then you're unfortunately just going to have to, all the Eagles are probably going to have to suffer accordingly. Not really interested in him as a backup. Nick Mullens is currently listed as the 3rd string, but he has more relevant fantasy production of late than Flacco. So Mullens, I think it'd be interesting to see if he actually does, if anything were to happen to Hurts, end up being the number 2 quarterback. But ideally, there'd be a significant drop-off in the Eagles if either Mullens or Flacco goes in. So ideally, it's just going to stay Hurts the whole season. We now move to the running back position for the Eagles. And running back, we start with Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders has had a lot of promise for a couple years in terms of how he will be, but he just simply hasn't displayed the consistency in order to really rely on him as a high-end RB1 for fantasy yet. He has the Eagles in the past with Doug Peterson they run a lot of running back committees, and I think that really hurts Sanders' value in terms of actually standing out. Be interested to see what Sirianni does. But there are some games in which Miles Sanders played excellently, noticeably against New Orleans. Only ran the ball 14 times, but he had 115 yards, 2 touchdowns out of that. He also had 4 receptions for 21 yards. So excellent fantasy value there, but then you look at the week before against Green Bay, he was only 10 for 31, no receptions. And that's kind of a similar tale that you see from game to game this season, is that he's very touchdown dependent. He didn't get a lot of them last year, but he's just simply not really getting the volume that some of these running backs were getting. He only ever went above 20 attempts or rushing attempts once. That's kind of not very encouraging for somebody that you're looking to break out as the full workhorse running back on this team. So we'll see what the Eagles do, but Sanders has got a lot of questions. If he slips, I think he could have sleeper value because of the potential that he has. But I would not really justify reaching for him, because I think that you can have a better chance at getting a more consistent running back from another team that's probably not as much in disarray as the Eagles are. Other players they have of note, Boston Scott is the backup running back. He's got good value for PPR purposes. I think that if you're in a pinch where you're in a deep league, you're late in the running back core trying to fill up your roster, Boston Scott could have a lot of value for you as a guy you can pick up in PPR settings, but not entirely interested in him as somebody that you'd really be interested in starting in situations other than that. He's probably got flex value or stream value from time to time, but that's about it. They also have Kerryon Johnson. This was another guy who had a lot of hype in Detroit, but unfortunately fell victim to the fact that Matt Patricia was committed to doing running back by committee, even if it didn't make sense with the other running backs around. And Kerryon Johnson kind of got beat out by DeAndre Swift because he didn't display the consistency that we thought he could. I have a hard time seeing him really taking advantage of that here. But this guy did have a lot of potential at some times. If anything were to happen to Sanders, Johnson I would not be surprised at all if he surprises people and ends up playing pretty well. So somebody worth keeping an eye out, either late in drafts or on waivers, depending on the size of your league. And then of note, they also drafted a running back this year. His name is Kenneth Gainwell out of Memphis in the 5th round. If these running backs really don't stand out and they continue to display their inconsistencies that have kind of inhibited them in the past, Gainwell could have an opportunity. I just don't think that this is really the best situation for him to take advantage of that, because of the way the Eagles have been running the ball the last few seasons. But Gainwell is somebody to keep an eye on just because they need a running back to step up on this team. Now we go to wide receivers, and this is a very interesting conversation of Eagles draft management and whether or not they've been managing these picks properly or not. But anyway, so they drafted Devonta Smith this year as their number 1 wide receiver. They took him with the 10th pick in the draft. In fact, they liked him so much that they traded up from 12th to 10th to take him. In my opinion, so that is not a good move. I think Devonta Smith could be a good receiver, and of all the receivers that I like on the Eagles, I think he could have potential to be the best one, because especially since he's got a rapport with Ertz when they were in Alabama. But drafting up to take a receiver 2 picks is not a good pickup. I think in general, I know that this year the hype with this draft is to get receivers because you got elite pass catchers. But more often than not, you look historically at drafts, a lot of receivers that were taken top end of drafts have not played up to their potential. Of note, guys that stand out are Corey Davis, who was taken number 5 overall, and I believe 2016. I talked about him in the Jets video. John Ross is another one who was taking borderline top 10 for the Bengals. He flamed out. Charles Rogers from years ago with the Lions, I believe, was the number 2 overall pick. And the thing that's crazy is that you can get these great receiver value later in the draft board, but these teams reach for these receivers and especially trading up to take a receiver, they really have to like Smith and have a plan to get him involved in order for that to work. But receivers tend to struggle their rookie year. There are exceptions to that, but receivers usually tend to break out in their second or third year, and the rookie year is a little more of a struggle getting used to the offense, especially Devonta Smith getting used to the NFL offense from being in Alabama. Very concerning to me. But Smith, I think, given the rest of the receivers, has value just because they need somebody to step up, and he's got rapport. But I'm not very high on reaching for Smith. If he does fall to be around the draft board and you're not in a position where you need a starting receiver, he's a good flyer to take advantage of, but not somebody that you want to reach up for at all and think that this guy is going to be the next Justin Jefferson of this year. I just don't see that happening personally. Other receivers that they have, and this is just another example of draft ineptitude, Jalen Reagor, who they drafted last year with the 22nd pick in the draft. So you're not only taking an elite receiver this year in the first round, but you took an elite receiver last year in the first round. So your overall roster needs help, in my opinion, if you're just taking receiver after receiver. And it just continues getting worse from here. But basically, Reagor was very disappointing last year. He had multiple games in which he only had one reception. He only ever exceeded 55 yards receiving on the season, and that was on one catch in which he had that. He only had one touchdown. He only ever had as many as 5 catches for a total of 49 yards, but he also ran for a negative 10 yards in that game, so he lost a point there. So it's just, this guy does not display the consistency yet to be relied upon. And he, especially when Ertz was quarterback, he didn't particularly look great either. So it's concerning to me. This team needs somebody to step up, but I'm not sure if it's going to be Reagor. And then that moves to the next guy, Travis Fulgham, who 6th-round pick, but led the team in yards receiving. But he also started the season very well, particularly against Pittsburgh. He had a 10-reception game, 152 yards, a touchdown. But with Jalen Hurts in the games that he started, Fulgham only had 5 catches across 3 games. So that's very concerning to me, is can Hurts even get him in a position that they can rely upon him as a receiver? Does he have that chemistry with Fulgham that Wentz did apparently early in the season? A lot of questions there. Fulgham has, I think, of all these receivers, the greatest sample size to show promise based on how he started last season. But I got a lot of questions about Travis Fulgham as well. So all these receivers are very concerning to me, especially with we don't know what this offense is going to look like. We don't know what Hurts' preference are going to be, or if he's going to mostly be a running quarterback. Just a lot of stuff up in the air. And then another note is that in the year before last, they took J.J. Arcega-Whiteside with a 2nd-round pick early that I believe they also traded up for. So you've taken wide receivers 3 of the last 4 years. Over the last 3 years. The last 2 seasons when you took wide receivers, they were mostly ineffective and inconsistent. So that doesn't exactly bode well for Smith. He's going to really have to break that trend. Otherwise, this front office is really going to look bad. And they especially look worse because the number 1 receiver last season in terms of receptions, ding, ding, that's my trivia question, so comment below if you're still watching, is Greg Ward. Greg Ward was undrafted. So this whole scenario of the Eagles just goes to show you that wide receivers being reached for in drafts is totally unpredictable and a bad move for fantasy general, or just for football general managers to do, because you can get great receiver value late in drafts for guys that adjust to the offense and fit well in the system. You don't need to reach for these receivers. Build your whole roster and give yourself a chance. So all the Eagles look like they're doing all the wrong things. Maybe they can fix it this season, but I don't really see that happening. That's all I got for receivers. For tight ends, their tight end is Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert is another guy who's got some hype potential around him as the backup to Ertz for many years. He will probably be the starter this season, but Goedert also was not entirely consistent last season either. Goedert had his most success in 2019, late in the year with Carson Wentz, but Carson Wentz is not there anymore. We don't know what Nick Sirianni is going to do as a offensive schemer for this team. So I think Goedert has potential just because of just the lack of weapons that they have with experience on this roster. But Goedert is not somebody that I'm super high on reaching for because he hasn't really shown that he can be a consistent tight end when he's the sole focus on a team. A lot of his success was when they had Ertz on the field as well, but Ertz is most likely not going to be on the Eagles this season. He's probably going to get cut or traded or something like that. So I've got a lot of questions about Goedert, not super high on him either. We move to the defense now. They've got some good defensive players on their team, like Fletcher Cox. Darius Slay has been good in the past, kind of struggled a little bit last year. So they have potential to turn it around, but I just don't see it happening personally. They probably will have some good stream value from time to time in games, especially late in the season. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a good end of the season because those NFC East games tend to be very low scoring and very competitive. But Eagles defense, I'm not super high on relying upon. Although you can get them on waivers, and if they do well beginning of the season, maybe take a flyer on them. So the Philadelphia Eagles kicker is Jake Elliott. He's been there for a few years, kind of been up and down from time to time, but I'm personally not very high on Jake Elliott this season, and the only reason being is because of the offense. Again, as I've said with all these kickers, if they're not converting in the red zone, Jake Elliott could have a good season, but Jake Elliott has also gone through stretches where he's been highly inconsistent as well. So that's very concerning to me in terms of relying on him as a kicker for fantasy purposes. All right, well, that's all I got on the Eagles. Once again, apologize for my little rant at the beginning of the video, but I just want to make things like that clear that I want to devote my time to the people that want help on this channel. People that pretend like they want help and are really just trying to be devious. I really don't have any sympathy for people like that. I could read through it, so just don't do that on this channel. In fact, don't do it anywhere. It's wrong. So, but for those of you that are really interested, I really am excited about this opportunity to help you guys this season. I've been putting a lot of thought and emphasis into these videos, and I know I don't have a lot of views right now, but I really appreciate those of you that do watch and do ask questions. And yeah, I'm excited to help you guys this season. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time in our Pittsburgh Steelers video. See ya.